This is part 7 of the Delta 7-inch motor-driven bench grinder rebuild series. If you haven't seen part 6, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we're going to begin the assembly of the grinder. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. First, let me quickly say that there were a couple of things that I did in this rebuild and then had to go back and redo or correct. So be sure to watch this video in its entirety before you attempt any of this stuff. That being said, the first thing we're going to do is install the motor data panel. So this is the panel that I had Matt Blast make for me. And right now it does not have any holes drilled in it and it is not bent. So we're going to have to shape it a little and drill out the holes. What I'm doing here is just kind of making sure that the markings on the data panel and the holes on the stator line up. So I'm just going to use a punch here, and that'll help center that drill bit. And we'll just drill it out. And then we're going to insert a panel screw or a drive screw, whichever you want to call them. And you can get these from McMaster Car. They come in a variety of sizes. They usually sell in packs of like 100, and they're like, I don't know, $10 for a pack of 100. So they're not expensive. So once we've got the top lined up, we can go ahead and drill out the bottom hole. And then we can go ahead and install the panel. If I can get everything to line up without dropping everything. So we'll just get that first panel screw tapped into the stator to get it started. And then we'll put the bottom one in. Just trying to get it lined up. And then get it started. Well, get it lined up. And it might help if we rotate that a little. Work smarter, not harder. And then we'll seat those with this brass punch. And there we go. Next, we're going to be installing the serial number panel on the base. And this is the original serial number panel that I painted. I think it turned out pretty good. And those holes need to be opened up just a little bit. Since these panel screws are larger than the original ones, which that turns out to be a big plus in a little bit here. And then we'll insert the second panel screw. Get it started, and then we'll seat those with a brass punch. And next we've got the brass tag from the original owner. And I found out that this basically means that they've got a machine shop at this factory, or they had a machine shop at this factory. And when any of these pieces of equipment went to the machine shop, that's when they got tagged with these brass tags. So, a little backstory on that. It's how they can track maintenance on various pieces of equipment. So next, you can see that triangle there. I forgot to remove some masking that's on the inside of the stator, and I'll figure that out in a second here once I go to sit this on here. And yeah, so we just need to get that piece of masking tape out of there. And then we can install the base to the stator. And it's at this point that I realized, well, crap, I've got the motor data panel on upside down. Yeah, but I decided it's going to be easier to work on it once we've got the base on the stator, so we'll go ahead and install the base. So this has 2 screws, and both of those screws get a lock washer. And we'll be loosening and removing one of these screws to attach the ground when we get to the wiring portion. But until then, we can just tighten everything down. And there we go. So you'll notice, looking at the base right now, you can see one of the holes on the back side for the wires. So that panel is definitely upside down. So the way we're going to fix this is we're just going to mask off around each one of those panel screws. And we're going to do what we attempted to do with the original panel screws, which is we're just going to cut a little slot using a cutoff wheel and a Dremel, or in this case, my Fordham. And both of these. And then we'll spin them out with a flat tip screwdriver. I just want to make sure that that is going to work. And yep, it's turning, so we can continue. And the purpose of that masking tape is in case we go past the head here, we don't end up marring up that panel too much. But if you're careful, you shouldn't really mess it up. So then we can just stick a flat tip screwdriver in there and twist these out as if they were screws. Because the panel screw itself has splines on it that are spiraling, I guess. And so turning it out is no big deal. Then we can remove that masking tape and flip that panel over. And I'm going to make sure I point to where the on-off switch goes so that we're correct. And then we can reinstall this panel just like we did originally, except the correct way up. So if you'll notice, all of our loose lead wires coming out of the stator are on the right-hand side now. And I should have realized that when I was putting the panel on, because the centrifugal switch and the governor and all of that is in the right-hand bearing hub. So this is one of the reasons why I gave you that little note at the beginning to watch the entire video before you try to do something, so that you don't have to do what I just did. But now that we've got that seated, we're ready to continue. So the next thing we need to do is we've got these 3 pieces of wire that we need to reproduce with new wire. And then we've got a couple of wires inside the stator, lead wires, that we cut that we're going to need to extend. So to do that, for the lead wires, I'm using silicone wire. And then we've got the actual centrifugal switch that still has all the solder on it from where those wires were connected. So I'm getting rid of all that solder. I'm grinding those little panels down flat. And what I've decided to do here is, since they're kind of thick, I'm cleaning up the centrifugal switch with this 400 grit abrasive wheel. But what I've decided to do is, since those on the back side, the side you can't see where the wires connect, there's like a 1/8 of an inch thick block of brass. So I went ahead and drilled out 2 holes in those, and then I'm going to thread them so that those screws you can see kind of in the top left there can be used to connect those wires with loop terminals. So we're just going to chamfer and clean up those holes real quick before we thread them. You can see how thick those little blocks are on the bottom. So there's enough of a bite there that you can get a screw in there and it's going to lock down pretty good. Now that piece right there that I'm hitting with my left finger, that's where one of the wires goes, and it was just soldered on there. And I don't like just soldering stuff together. I want to have something for it to grab onto. So I'm going to bend it up a little bit, and I'm going to drill a hole in it. And we'll run the wire through there, bend it back over on itself, and then solder it in place. So to drill out that hole, I've got it just braced on a little piece of wooden block here. There we go. So that should be more than sufficient. So here we are, just threading these 2 holes. And it's brass, so it threads real easily. Yeah, clean that off real quick. And that'll make connecting all of these wires a lot easier rather than soldering. And the advantage to that is if I've got any of this wrong, I can come back and change what's connected to what. So we just needed to put loop terminals on the end of all those wires. And this red wire is the one wire that has to go through that little hole that we drilled. So we'll just insert it in that hole, and then we'll bend it back on itself. I just want to make sure we've got enough there and that everything's going to line up properly. So we're good to go. We can go ahead and bend it and solder it. So my soldering skills are not world-renowned, and I probably need a new tip for my soldering iron. But in any case, this is the right side bearing hub, and we're going to go ahead and install the bearing. So these bearings have an extended inner race that protrudes from both sides equally, so there's no orientation requirement here. You can just drop the bearing in, and it starts to seat, but it doesn't want to go all the way down. So we'll seat that with the wooden dowel. And once we've got it seated, on this side there is a bearing lock nut that we can just spin in there. And then lock it in place with a flat tip screwdriver and a hammer. Too easy. Next, we'll be installing the centrifugal switch. And for this bearing hub, there is a cutout here, and that matches the orientation of the bottom of that switch. So knowing which way this hub goes and knowing which hub to use is really simple here. Plus, this is the only one that has the 4 mounting points on it. But there's only one way this switch goes in here. So I just installed little 4 insulator, paper insulators. And then I tightened down the switch with the 4 screws. And then I connect all of the lead wires to the proper terminals. There's only 2 terminals on this switch. And then I've got a bushing, a rubber bushing that needs to go inside the hole from the stator going into the base. And that just keeps the wires from abrading in there. And then we can route these 2 wires that go into the base, the black one and the white one, through that bushing and into the base. And then we can install the bearing hub. So additionally, if you recall during this assembly, I did mark both of these bearing hubs and the wheel covers with a punch so that I could orient everything properly, and that'll come into play with the other bearing hub, the left side. But next, all I'm doing is installing the Acorn nuts on the long screws, and then I'm inserting the long screws through this hub and into the stator, and that'll help me line up this hub a little better before I seat it. The original Acorn nuts were brass, but I went ahead and bought some black ones from McMaster Carr. I just like the way the black hardware pops on the outside with this machinery gloss gray look. And then we can go ahead and seat that hub. And that block of wood that was just under the stator, it was just on the outer edge of the stator. The windings were not resting on it. So here we're going to assemble the rotor, and we just put the insulator washer on there. It's a little paper washer, and then the governor assembly, which is that plastic piece. And I'm just going to bend out the mounting bracket a little bit so that the two governors can line up with the hole that they have to in the assembly and in the brackets, and then bend that bracket back in place. So I didn't have to bend this to get them off, but I had to bend it to get them back on, so no big deal. Same thing for the other side. Make sure everything flows nice and smooth, and then we can throw the two springs on. And why I feel a need to do this with my hand upside down, I'm not sure, but it works for me, so okie dokie. And there we go. Make sure everything works. Yep. We'll just shoot a little bit of super slick stuff in there and make sure that that all rides nice and smooth. Next, we're going to install the rotor into the stator. So just make sure you've got the governor facing the centrifugal switch. And then it should just seat in there nice and smooth. Make sure everything turns smoothly. Now before you push that governor through there, just take a look in there and make sure you don't have any wires in the way. And if you do, you're going to have to route those. But everything lined up fine for me. So now we're ready to install the left side bearing hub. Now this one, I don't know that it matters whether there's a right side and a wrong side up and down, but this is where when I made that mark with the punch during disassembly, I'm able to line it back up. So I know I've got it facing the proper direction that it was before I ever took this thing apart. But like I said, I'm not sure it really matters. It's symmetrical, or at least it looks symmetrical, so you could probably rotate it 180 degrees and it would still work just fine. Then once we've got it in there, we can go ahead and get those long screws to punch through the other side and then start putting the Acorn cap nuts on them. And once we've got all those in place, we can go ahead and start tightening them down. And that paint is on there kind of thick, so it's not really seating well right now. So we can try to close it up by tightening down these Acorn nuts, but I'm going to end up having to use a punch real quick here for that one long screw. And we'll just drive it right there. That should be enough to get enough threads to punch through that we can get that nut on there. And then we just tighten all four of these down. Work your way around until you've got the entire motor all snugged up. And here we are on the left bearing hub, and we're going to install the shim and then the spring washer. And I don't know why, but the spring washer didn't want to just drop in there. It's hitting the sides pretty good, but not a huge deal. So we're just going to go ahead and put the bearing directly on top of it and seat the bearing. Yeah, normally those spring washers, they've got a little bit of play around the outer edge of them where they fit down in that board just fine, but not a big deal. So once we've got the bearing on there as far as we can get it by hand, we're just going to use a piece of steel pipe that will be resting on the inner race of the bearing, so it's not resting on the shields, and seat that bearing. Make sure everything's turning nice and smooth. Next, we have the bearing seal assemblies, and those have felt on them. And of course, I cleaned them with Simple Green and rinsed them off and everything. So now we need to re-oil that felt. So this is 5W30, and I let them soak for about a half an hour. Then we'll just dry them off a little bit with a paper towel. We'll do the same for both of them. Next, we're just going to apply some super lube to the milled surface on the bearing hubs and on the wheel covers. This is just to kind of keep it from rusting. And we'll go ahead and stick that bearing seal on there. So the protruding part of that bearing seal needs to be facing away from the motor. It actually rests inside the bore that is in the wheel cover, like that. And then you've got these two socket head set screws. And each one of them should get a anti-vibration, what they call it, an anti-vibration washer, which is just a lock washer. And then you can torque them down. And of course, the lock washers I have there are too big, so because there's a recess that these screws have to sit in. So you can use some thread locker, and that should do the trick just as well. Next, we have the inner flange, and it just gets pressed directly into that felt and seated. And then we have an inner flange nut for the left side. And that sucker is left-hand threaded. So we just tighten it down. That flange is going to turn with the rotor. And next, I've got a little touch-up area I need to do where I scratched it up. So we will just mask off the motor data panel and the two Acorn nuts that would be closest to it. And we're just going to hit it with that machinery gloss gray again. And those scratches are a little deeper than I thought initially, so I decided, maybe a little more paint. So reapplying that tape needs to go further out so that we're not applying it on the wet paint. And then there we go. That should be good enough. And we can go ahead and remove all that masking, and that's going to wrap up this video. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down in the comments section. And the next video will hopefully wrap this project up. Until then, I appreciate the support, and I will see you next time.